name's Jamie Hanton, I'm the director here, and it's my pleasure to introduce Philippa Payne and Cushla Donaldson for this public talk.
Hello everyone. Kia ora.
Just before I do introductions, I'll just give you some context about the talk, what we're doing here. The physics room was invited in 2017 to exhibit at the Melbourne Art Fair in the project rooms, and the project rooms are the non-commercial aspect of the art fair. So alongside a whole bunch of commercial and dealer galleries, 3 or 4 project spaces from around Australasia were invited to put proposals in to show new work in these spaces. And we worked with Cushla and Aisha Green on Unconditional 3, which is part of our year-long itinerant series that looked at ideas of reciprocity, trade, exchange, hosting and guesting. So the show in Melbourne was a really good opportunity to kind of explore that in a trade Tasman in a kind of oceanic way. So the work that Cushla's made 501s speaks directly to that. But what I'm going to do first is just introduce Philippa, and Philippa's going to talk a little bit about the term 501s, some of the legislation and the legal background for it. So Philippa is the co-founder of Iwi and Oz and Route 501, both advocacy groups advocating for New Zealanders in Australia. So thank you so much, Philippa, for being here tonight.
That's all right. Hi everyone, my name's Philippa, as Jamie said. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm the co-founder of Iwi and Oz, which is a human rights campaign advocating for New Zealand citizens living in Australia. In 2001, the legislation was amended, and we have actually been written out of any human rights basically in Australia, and I believe we have legislation that discriminates against our nationality there. Route 501 is the campaign that is dealing with deportations through the changes that were made to Section 501 and Section 116 in 2014. New Zealand citizens went from not being even kept in the statistics database of what was going on in Australian immigration detention centres to the following year being the #1 nationality in Australian detention centres. So within 1 year, that discrimination that I was talking about with the legislation left us so vulnerable in our visa status in Australia that we became the #1 nationality in the detention centre, which is really concerning for myself. I spent many years living in Australia, and that's how I got involved by my oldest daughter not being able to attend university there. So from that, as a mother aspect, I became a bit of an advocate and a loudmouth, and I guess what Australia would call a troublemaker. But I believe that New Zealanders and Australia have a long history, and it's time for us to stand up and advocate and support our people that are being held there. So under Section 501, we have categories which you can be placed in a detention centre. It can be based on your character. So the immigration minister now thinks that he's above the democracy and system in Australia, and he can judge you that he doesn't like the colour of your hair. So you're out. And before you go out, you're placed in a detention centre, which at this stage can be for any length of time. The process at the moment is that you sign for your release, so you voluntary sign, or they have started involuntary deportation. And we know of people that have gone to seek medical help and all of a sudden actually been on a plane back to New Zealand with no notice. So it's very, very hard dealing with people in detention centres because they're completely powerless over everything that's happening to them. The government system leaves them completely denied of any empowerment for themselves while they're in the detention centre, and also for their families. So I became in this project when Cushla, are you interested in Cushla?
No, yes, you go.
So Cushla is this fantastic woman beside me who gave me an email and asked me if I would be interested in helping bringing to light what was going on in Australia, and she came up with this artwork which I will hand over to her to describe, and we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Philippa. Yeah, I'm always amazed at the way that you're able to put quite what can be quite a complex scenario in very succinct terms, because I think that there was one thing, how I came to know about the issue was I was talking to a friend of mine, David Hall, who's a policy advisor. He works at AUT Policy Observatory. And when Jamie invited me to participate in the Melbourne Art Fair, I said to David, so because I'm not a commercial artist, I don't have a dealer and I don't work in those traditional ways. I often work to context. So I said to him, "What do you?" There's a whole heap of things between Australia and New Zealand that are changing in our relationship at the moment, and what do you think sort of is the most vital or key aspect that's happening at the moment? And he said, well, have you had a look at the deportations that are occurring? And I had heard of them because I do keep up with politics, but I hadn't looked deeply into it. And when I started researching it and asking some friends I have in the media about it, it kind of took me down a bit of a rabbit hole, actually, and emotionally and intellectually, because then I started realising what it actually entailed, and what had been reported in the media was not the full story that was happening in the deportations and the centres. And in the time frame of creating the work, there was, because of Philippa's work, there was a report that particularly affected me of Junior, a young man who had taken his own life in the detention centres, but could have been saved, and that affected me quite profoundly, and I feel quite changed by the process of making this work, actually. So that led me to quite a full commitment into the project, and because I think a lot around, and I've always thought a lot around representation in a work. What does it mean, and where do the power dynamics of representation lie? I had been doing some reading about what we could potentially aim towards in our society, and that to me was participation parity. It's a phrase from a writer called Nancy Foster, and I thought, rather than trying to represent what was going on in traditional ways, I would try and invite the people who were having these experiences, who had been forcibly removed from participating in the society of their choice, and have them participate back into that context, back into Australia, and an economic context, which is the art fair. Yeah.
So we'll show a 5-minute excerpt from the video.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, go on. Yep.
Not very good resolution. It's far better. Really.
probably worth saying at this stage that this video was installed on a 6x3 LED screen, like 6 meters by 3 meters, modular screens in the space. Yep. So a bank of screens. Yep. Of one image creating one image.
It might be in
There was a great, I mean, the program that Cushla you worked to develop to allow those text messages to come in gave account to the length of the text messages. So if there was a longer text message, it would stay up for longer for people to read the entirety of the message as well. So perhaps you can just talk about the process of development of that mechanic.
So essentially what was required, because the detainees had only recently had permission to actually, on Christmas Island they had their phones confiscated, didn't they, Philippa? And then they were going to take the phones from other deportation centres, although that's what I forgot to tell you. When I went to visit at the deportation centre in Melbourne, they had their phones taken too.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I forgot to mention that. So they'd had their phones taken away, and the federal court, 2 weeks roughly before the work was going to be shown, ruled that their phones must be given back to them as part of their human rights. So they received the phones back, and then we needed to get enough phones to them, and some of the phones were given back by the government without SIM cards in them, so that was really useful. So what was required was a technology that they could text and it would work like a hack into the video that I was projecting. So I spoke to a young man who was very good with that sort of technology from his youth. He now works for a big company. And I was talking to him officially through his company work, and then he, I explained the project to him, and then he said, oh, hang on a minute, and I received a Gmail email saying, I'll do it for free, I hate that button. And that was an Australian. So that's
Oh,
it.
really?
Yeah,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, no, he was in Australia. So yeah, that said to me that actually, and also when I was over in Melbourne, that the young people as angry about these things as we are. There's definite generational shift going on that needs to be tapped into, I think. But anyway, so going into that, I can't, in case the work gets set up again, I don't want to go too much into how that technology works. But it's actually not that hard. It just took someone who knew what they were doing.
Could you talk about the pacing and the interruption and the gathering of text messages and how that was stored? Or
Sure, and there's a little aesthetic secret actually to it too, is that you can make a hack look like anything you want. Yeah, it doesn't actually have to look like a Linux Kali hack, but a Linux Kali hack is a kind of traditional hack. So I wanted a aesthetic hack that hackers would look at and go, oh, it's a da 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 da, and not think it was lame, you know. So I was quite careful about the research into the aesthetic of what those texts or the hacks actually look like. The length of time was part of the code, so if there was a longer text or two texts, then that would be played for longer. So it we tried it at normal speed read, but I tested it on a couple of the guys working at the art fair, and they reckoned it was too fast, so we slowed it down slightly to give people more time to read it when they came up. The texts came in live, and they would come up immediately and then go back into a storage system and be replayed. So if new ones didn't come up, then it would go back into the ones that had already been sent. And they were completely unedited. I didn't view them before they were shown, which was legally probably the most tricky area, because certainly some of them could have been quite colourful. Well, I mean, it wasn't so much the language that was the legal issue, it was more, although that, yeah, maybe in the contract, but there was defamation issues that I had to sort out, and where, actually, yeah.
For the people in the detention centre, it brought such a wonderful sense of hope and unity, because this is the first time as a collective that I know of that their voices were being shared to the outside world. So it didn't matter what nationality or even why you were in the detention centre, be it under the character test, association, criminal record, or for any reason, your voice was needed. And that was the big message that I was trying to get to everyone, is participation and your voice being needed means that your story is getting out there, and we can't educate the world unless the news is coming from within the detention centre itself. I mean, I do what I do because I feel passionately about it, but the person that shares the story the best is the person that it's happened to. So it was really, really, it was hard work reading some of those texts, and I know for myself, I went home most nights and had a tear. You know, you held it together and then you just went home and crumbled, because the reality is behind every text is actually a person's life, and that was overwhelming in many times, and it was beautiful display. I just thought the glass slipper just looked so spectacular. It was such a regal appearance, and then this contrast of darkness with what was going on inside the detention centre. I thought it blended really. It sounds really, and it was so hard to explain to people before you did it, but it just blended so well at the exhibition. So congratulations to you.
Thanks. Congratulations to you and your hard work. I mean, it was absolutely incredible thing to organise people in incarceration to participate, you know, and take those risks. I mean, these people were wearing huge risks.
There's a huge amount of risk to be brave in the detention centre, because unfortunately Australian detention centres are known worldwide for the horrific treatment that goes inside there, and I know people that have been brutally abused physically, and unfortunately the mental health that goes on in there is deteriorating daily, because it is a place where it's institutionalised oppression.
Yeah, it's fascism in action.
Absolutely.
And that, I think, was the thing that affected me the most going into it. When I say I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, I mean, and that's where I have to give all credit to Jamie as well, and as a very brave curator and also one that fielded a couple of whoopee calls as well, you know, because I think working in these areas, it's not just art, right? You know, I had decided about 6 to 8 months ago that the world was becoming as such that I could no longer continue with an ambiguously political practice. Ambiguity to me had become complicity, and I had decided that I needed to, you know, go hard or go home. And yeah, I mean, actually, the first question when I decided to do it this way was to a couple of friends: is, do you think it's enough? Yeah, because this is real time. This is bad, and this is Australia. You know, we need to really do something about that.
And I truly every day believe that this country is the country that's going to change what happens in the detention centres in Australia. I believe in the community, the sense of culture and every aspect of depth in New Zealand, and as a person that's lived in Australia, I don't believe that runs in their society to the strength that we do. And I believe New Zealand is a country that's got a soul. And I pray every day, and I wait for the day that this country gets up and marches on those streets for our people that are in a different country. I do not sit by and justify the fact that this is another country's sovereign borders, that they can treat people how they want to be treated in. The reality of the fact for New Zealanders living in Australia is they're treated like that because of their nationality and because of the Trans-Tasman Travel Agreement. So if we as a country do not stand up and advocate for our own people, we're leaving over 400,000 people vulnerable in that country. And that's including children.
And and I think that's a good fact. If we let this continue, where does it end? I mean, you were saying, Philippa, also there have been people held in detention for deportation who actually have Aboriginal heritage. There are people who are children, like 17, and more going to be detained of that age. People have died in incarceration.
And unfortunately there's going to be more deaths, and the suicide rate for deportees coming back to New Zealand sadly is growing as well, because we seem to allow them to come back, and I'm a New Zealand citizen who lives here and I believe in the security of our country and our society as well, but to what point is our security more at the front than someone else's human rights? Where they come into our country and because many of these people have never actually been here, but they've been nationalised by their parents as a New Zealand citizen. They come to New Zealand, and upon the first thing that happens to when they get deported here is fingerprinted, your blood taken and your photograph taken at the airport. So you're not even allowed to come into this country and get a sense of freedom or a sense of self or self-worth. We actually you come into this country and we'll take that all from you before you're allowed to go out there. Now, one of the things that I say to the people that are coming back through deportation is, you remember when you land on this country that you have just as much right as everybody else here. The reason why you're being deported back to this country is because of your citizenship and your nationality, so you make sure that you mark it. You make sure that you come here and you stand with your head tall. Because being in a detention centre is hard, but those first 3 weeks back in New Zealand is the hardest thing anyone can ever actually go through in my book.
And that's where we need to also have wraparound care for the people returning. The government does sweet FA at the moment.
Sweet FA. I mean, if we're going to set up a system where we're worried about the security for our country and taking DNA, why are we not setting up income support at that stage? Why are we not setting up medical care? Why are we not giving counselling? Why are we not giving friendship? Why are we not letting people know where AA is, NA is? We're not doing anything to benefit that person apart from completely demoralise them again. And their first point of freedom, we're demoralising them again and saying that we're now watching you, even though you might have had a traffic offence. or your hair might be red, and shit, I don't like you because of your red hair. I'm going to demoralise you because I think that I have that right. And that's not okay for myself.
I mean, unfortunately too, there is an aspect to this that it isn't just about having red hair. So 50% of the people in detention are New Zealand citizens, and of those 60% are Māori and Pacific Islands. So, and the rest are bogans basically. So you've got pretty much a snapshot of New Zealand working class being deported from Australia. Yeah. It's class war, it's racist, yeah. It's all the things that we aren't. So it needs to be talked about.
It definitely needs to be talked about, and it's legislation that might not be written racist, but it is racistly implemented as far as I'm concerned. And going into the detention centres, you can actually see that by looking around, because white are the minority of what I've seen. And there's many other ethnicities, not just Pacific Island or Māori descent in there, but white is the minority, and that's not okay. It's not okay. If you're going to have one rule, I believe it should be for everyone, and it doesn't matter what the colour of your skin is. Unfortunately, you stand out more. And in saying that too, in the detention centres, your cultural needs are pretty much not adhered to. So like on Waitangi Day this year, we had people in Yonga Hill Detention Centre who fought for 3 weeks to be able to celebrate that. Now, they were told that they're in Australia, but yet they're in Australia in a detention centre because of their nationality, but you won't endorse the culture of that nationality. So which hand do you want, Australia? Because you're taking away everything from us. And I'm sorry, I know the room feels very, very deep. This is a really, really deep conversation, and I feel for Cushla, because I know that you went through some emotional stuff, and I myself many times go through emotional ups and downs because it's such a hard road, and I just don't want to overwhelm people with what I'm talking about, but it's really deep shit, guys. I'm sorry to say it. This is really, in 2018, we have a country that is holding people in a detention centre outside of the judicial system. So it doesn't matter what a judge says. An immigration minister can come in and override what we've fought for in democracy in our history for many, many years and say no, because I've decided this is how it's going to be.
Are there any questions from the floor?
What you mentioned that some of the text messages had some, because you couldn't, you didn't view them before they were shown, so it just came up unedited, I guess. And you mentioned that you had to wear some of the brunt of, like, some of the effects of the content. Like, what was that? Or
Yeah.
like, what was the reaction like?
Look, I mean, mainly it was preparatory wearing of it. Like, I had to work out if there was, with a work like this, I had to logistically work out what all the potential repercussions were to keep everybody safe, including physics room, including me, and the detainees especially. And so I basically had, what I mean by having to wear it is that if a defamatory text had come through that someone had seen and reported, then, you know, I would have to, that would be a civil case against me. Yeah. So, but we discussed it at length, and there was a discussion about whether I view them and edit them or whether I don't, and I had always felt that to edit these people again or to censor them again is completely against the kaupapa of the work. So I decided to take the risk. Balls out.
You good lahini.
Yeah, well, do your best, right? But I think I do think so. I do think we're at that stage that artists have to make these choices. I think we're at the stage, where we go, okay, do I want an art practice, that is actually engaging and actually working to this? And how do I do it? Do I change one person at a time, which is completely valid, engaging with that kind of spiritual aspects or, these kind of things, if you, work it out as a, good artist should. Or do you actually kind of, and I've always been a bit, surprisingly.
How do you negotiate the representation of trauma and suffering and balance that against a need for representation or a need for the stories to be told? Like what? This is the question that came back again and again for me in this is like, where is the line of benefit? Where is the line of good or public good? Where is the line of aesthetic consideration? Where do all of these things fit into this conversation?
Absolutely. It is the question, right, of the moment. And other artists like Willis Thompson and other people are dealing with those similar kind of contexts in different ways. I feel that you can't make work like this successfully, and you can't not make it. If I didn't make this work, it would be wrong. If I make it, it's wrong. So either way, basically. But I chose to try and do it in such a way where what I believe would be the potential for our society to have participation parity, not dependent on gender, race, disability, mental health, participation parity in its true form. If I can carry some of that vision through into the way the work operates, that's the best I can do. And yes, there's issues around the authentic detainee, the authentic refugee, the representation of suffering, but the benefit of people not being able to say they didn't know is where I'm at. You can't walk away. You can't close your eyes, because the internet and social media have provided us with all the information we need now about what's going on, and we need to harden up.
We need to stand up, is what I believe this country needs to do, and that's something that I say quite often, even though I'm quite short, is that we actually do need to stand up and be accountable for the fact that if we leave the situation as it is, we're actually leaving a mess for our children, and we're leaving the mess to get wider and wider. When the laws changed, it was this many people that were in it. Now it's getting bigger and bigger, and more tweaks and things are coming along the way. Australia's looking at Mr Dutton, who's now not the Immigration Minister, but the new Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, is the person who made the amendments to this legislation in the first place. So I don't feel like we've actually benefited anything by the fact that Mr Dutton's not there, apart from the fact that he's not Prime Minister, which is, so scary to think that Australia would even consider a man who is so obviously racist and so obvious, such a liar, to be their leader. It was a very, very scary time, and what I feel like it's happened at the moment is it's taken a bit of a dull ache, because who do you fight against now? At least we knew who our targets were, and at the moment it's put a bit of a, well, let's wait and see, so it's suspended everything, apart from for Australia, who gets to carry on and keeps putting every day more and more people in detention centres. And I believe we're going to see more and more women come through, because the prison system over there is going through a change at the moment too. And we have families that the mum's been placed in a detention centre for crimes that were committed 15 years ago, because these crimes, I should change that, sorry. The legislation is retrospective, so it's not from this point onwards, it's from here and backwards. So if you committed a crime 15 to 20 years ago, you still fall under the same category as if a person who's going to commit a crime today, which I think is wrong. I think it's generally wrong. I'm a person that is definitely past as not being the most pure and innocent, but I'm a good person. And I've learned through my life experiences of doing the wrong things how to be a good person. So I don't think anyone in this world has actually, got a halo on their head from the time that they were born until the time that they die. And so who are we to sit down and say, well, you've got no future for what you've done in the past? And that's exactly what Australia is doing. And the other thing I'd like to address too is that most of these people that are deported are not people that are recent arrivals in Australia. Everyone seems to think that you fly in, next minute you're going to be deported. It's actually long-term residents, people that have been there for 15, 20, 35 years. Some of them have been there since they were 6 months old. Now, what part of New Zealand society is that our responsibility? So as a taxpayer of this country, why is it my responsibility to contribute economically my whole life, and then all of a sudden someone who spent 32 years in Australia and is only 34 years old, I'm supposed to contribute to his counselling in a country that hasn't given him any support? So in every way, I think New Zealand's being actually diminished in our sovereign rights here. And what are we supposed to do? Turn around and say, no, we're not going to take these people back? Unfortunately, I've met people in detention centres who countries will not take them back. They are looking at being in that detention centre for the rest of their life. The rest of their life. Now, I've met a person under Section 501 who's been in Australian detention centres for just under 4 years. 4 years. And his crime that he committed, he got less than 2 years in jail. So at what point are we actually going to say enough's enough? You've been accountable for what you've done. And let's not forget that some of these people haven't even committed crimes. It's on a character test. Cushla, I'm sorry, but my God, you're a nasty heathen. I'm your friend. I can't be your friend anymore.
Well,
I'm sorry, because I might be deported or judged.
I mean, this is the thing, right? This is the thing that actually... I mean...
You say what you want to say.
Well, I mean, I come from the Manawatu, right? I mean, they're deporting people for gang connections. I mean, who in Manawatu doesn't know someone in a gang? I mean, it is out the gate.
It is out the gate. The fact that you can sit in...
But you see, I'm white and I'm an artist. So
You probably wouldn't go on the board straight away, but once I've got rid of all the people that have been on the board, don't you think they're going to come for you too?
Oh yeah, well this is the thing, isn't it? It's like, where does it end?
Where does it end? You've got character test, association. If the government think that you're in the society and you're not doing any good, you're out. Out of it completely. And I don't think that's okay. I'm sorry. And, the deportation is the bottom of the cliff, but this all starts for New Zealanders in the fact that our Trans-Tasman travel agreement is not equal at all. So I'm of firm belief that needs to be shut. For security for us, we should be applying for visas to go into Australia like every other country, knowing exactly what status you're going to be on, knowing exactly how long you're going to be on, if you're on a student visa, if you're on a spousal visa, if you're on a work visa. It gives you the rules and clarification. At the moment, the way it is, we hop on an aeroplane and you could be held in a detention centre. I mean, I know of a person that lives in Twizel and went to visit their son in Perth. Now, he had never met his 2-year-old grandson, and he arrived in Australia and had a criminal conviction from 15 years ago. He was placed in a detention centre while his wife went to visit the son, and he was held in that detention centre for 3 weeks, and then was deported back to New Zealand. So not only has he not been able to meet his grandson, go and see his son, he's now been held in a detention centre and deported, which actually affects every aspect of his life or where he travels from now on. So, any one of us could be placed in a detention centre if we enter that country. And I believe that the responsibility of the New Zealand government is to stand up and address this matter. We can't just let it carry on. I think it's like letting the Pied Piper bring the rats across the wall. You're letting half of them get into the water and the other half are falling off the cliff. And I won't sit back and allow my children to have that vulnerability in their life.
Do you see any movement? Do you see any progress happening, Philippa? Do you see?
Absolutely,
this
look at
might
us
change?
now. We're in a room full of people that are actually here to talk about it. One about how the aspect of the art world, but actually education. And this is what Erin and I spent 5 years doing. In 2016, we did a hekoi all around Australia, and we went into detention centres and jails. And I'd never actually been into a jail before, or anything like that. And it was completely overwhelming. Completely. Sorry, I get very shaky and emotional because I get cold, and it's just so wrong. It's just so wrong, and I sit down here and I think 2018, really? This looks something that happened in 18th century, not the 2000s. And that's why I believe we should all, and I'm thankful to you all for coming, and I'm thankful to Jamie, and I'm thankful to Cushla. Most of all, I'm thankful to the people inside the detention centres for having the bravery and courage to participate. There was over 600 texts sent in.
Yeah, there were over 600 texts and over nearly 300 people participating in it. So, you know, I am incredibly grateful for those very brave people as well. I mean, having said that, with the detention centres themselves, I mean, I suppose I can say a detention centre, but I mean, I went to visit one while I was in Melbourne, and I've been in to visit prisons before, and it was worse than any prison I've been into. There was no natural light in the buildings. The people were held in rooms the size of a small kitchen, 8 people to a room. The man I was visiting, he was under non-contact for speaking out, and so I had to talk to him through a pane of glass. As I was walking through, you know, there was families with children who had been allowed to visit their person, and one thing that struck me, I think, the most was that the guards or the Serco workers all just seemed completely bored. And it was really that Hannah Arendt banality of evil, you know. They just couldn't wait to leave and hit the pub. They were just chatting about what they'd done on a Saturday night. It was so banal. It was disgusting. Yeah.
And the thing about detention centres is they're not structured like a prison. So in a prison you're given courses that you could do, you're given classes, you're given counselling, you're given things to help reintegrate you into society, to help benefit you. Detention centre is completely the opposite. So they have a point system there, and you get 30 points automatically, and you're to attend classes to get other points. Now these classes that they've got are adult colouring in. They've had bouncy castles at Younger Hill. They've got English lessons, and most Kiwis can speak pretty good English. So the classes that they're providing are not doing anything to actually benefit anyone in detention centre. In fact, they're more opposite, where they're bringing frustration and resentment and not doing anything to help them. And so as a New Zealand citizen, which has had 1,200 people deported back to New Zealand, I'd like to say to Australia, why are we having to be the blunt of you're not actually caring about anyone in this process? I mean, pretty much most people can colour in. I don't need points to learn how to colour in. Now, if you don't do those point systems, you can get up to 60 points, which you can then spend in the detention shop. And, you know, I can talk about it, but again, that's all been shut down, so the whole process now is profit is going back into Serco, or Border Force, the company. It used to be that you could take things, boot in, or send gifts in, and that's completely shut down now, and the guys are only allowed to access through the shop. So we're not even allowed to take in meals again. Because, you know, I was going to stick my MacGyver hair clip and my chocolate cake and break everyone out. Wish I could. Yeah, I wish I could. It's very, very, very hard leaving a detention centre. It's very, very hard leaving people there that you know shouldn't be there. That should be free men and women.
It's pretty hard getting in too.
Yeah. that system has changed. It used to be that you could apply and get in within just before 24 hours. It's now 5 days, 5 working days that your application has to be in. And in that system, it actually has you cannot put an address from overseas. So I had to use someone's address within Australia, which they were a bit intimidated about. But you have to also have points of IDs and yeah.
A passport's not enough, so I needed a passport, driver's license, a letter saying that I had an address, for a bill, and that was just enough to get in. And I've got Ministry of Justice clearance for visiting prisons in New Zealand. That didn't mean anything. Going in, they have a metal detector I was frisked. There was a metal detector for my overcoat. I had to put all my bags and things in the locker. I wasn't allowed to take in my phone. It's like walking through an airport, and then I was drug swabbed. So if I had any evidence of drugs on me, like on my clothes or anything, then I wouldn't be allowed in. Yeah.
And the flip side of that is too, if Cushla had failed the drug test, the person inside the detention centre is then put on non-contact. So they're not allowed visitors, even though she's the one who's failed. All the other family has to stop coming and seeing normally for a small period too.
Yeah, we're not talking about jail. No. We're talking about people picked off the street, sometimes just on their way home from work, in the back of a van, and taken to this place with no trial. They're not allowed to get legal advice. They don't know when they're getting out. And they're New Zealanders, and it's in Australia. If this was white working class, white middle class kids, there'd be an absolute uproar, actually, and I hate saying that, but it's true. And that's why making art about it is actually really, for me, quite effective. Is because it's bringing it to an audience that isn't necessarily affected by this, but should be deeply concerned by this.
I know for people that I've spoken to in the detention centre, for a start, there was not many, but a few hesitant about the fact that this is their life, this is their life and their human rights, and they didn't want it. They didn't know how it was going to come through in an art aspect. For myself, it was about reaching every channel that we can. We've got to try every aspect to get everybody educated in New Zealand so that the true information gets out there. And they just loved the fact that you guys were out here listening, that people were out here actually wanting to hear what was going on and to listen to their stories. So I thank you, and I thank the art world for taking this up, because it has brought around a different category of people listening and being educated. And it's not just us socialists, bra-burning, advocates out there.
Although,
one day that's going to happen. Yeah. Sorry,
I saw you had a question.
No, it's not relevant.
Okay.
Yeah. Anymore.
really?
Okay.
There-
So how is it represented? How is the Kiwis in detention represented in the press in Australia?
In Australia, it's very much that we're used with the word criminal. So it's very much associated with gangs there, and they like to put out the hard, glorify people as rapists, or put the worst scenario that they can out there. And I'm not saying that those people have not been through the detention centre system, but they're actually the minority. You've got people in there for vandalism, people in there for shoplifting, you've got people for not committing any crimes, like we said. So we have a whole lot of people in there that I don't believe should be in there at all. They wouldn't be in a prison if they were put up in front of a judicial system, so why are they being held in the detention centre?
Yeah, in a recent article in the New Zealand Herald, it used the word criminals as well. Said the criminals were sort of.
That's what I'm.
In media, yes, there is sympathy.
It's changing.
So there's with particular media outlets that do proper research and don't just go to other outlets. So New Zealand Herald often will pick their stories up from Australian media. But if you're looking at things like the The Age is quite good. Radio New Zealand,
New Zealand is
TVNZ, News Hub. Actually, everyone knows the facts now, especially since that 17-year-old boy was held, and the media became really racked up because they weren't able, the Australian government weren't handing over details of him or his name, and so a couple of journalists, they don't like that, so they went hell for leather and did a lot more research. But there still is that kind of thing that comes up, you know, like the criminals. But I mean, it's actually infactual.
And I do believe it is changing and it's getting better and better, and that's taken a lot of hard work from the guys in the detention centres and the advocacy groups that are out there. You know, when the riots happened in Christmas Island and a plane was brought back to New Zealand, it was advertised as Con Air. You know, we were getting this plane load of criminals, and it was all sensationalised in New Zealand. I don't believe that same scenario would happen again, where it's going to be Con Air. I believe that New Zealand actually wants to hear the personal side of it and wants to hear the truth. And, you know, back when it was all starting, they used to call it media porn because they only wanted the real gritty, bad stuff. But every day I'm working with media in different ways, getting future stories out there, doing the immediate stuff that happens, and doing projects last week. Oh, and that's something to mention too, when we were in Melbourne, I was contacted by the BBC. So they were here last week and have been doing a documentary, and part of Cushla's work and the text is hopefully, because we don't get to know what goes actually on screen, hopefully that will be in it as well.
I'm sorry, I was here late, but I'm not quite clear.
Kia ora, Nathan, how are you?
Good. Thank you. I'm just not clear on what runs the holding centres.
Detention centres? Yeah.
Kia ora.
So they're operated by a company called
They're
Serco.
a private company. That was my question.
It's Serco, yeah.
Serco, and Serco's only in one of our prison systems here, and
Spring Hill.
yeah, they used to be in Mount Eden, but they've actually been removed because they didn't uphold their contract. So Serco runs the detention centres in Australia.
Are they an international company?
Yeah.
Yes, they are. They also run the Obamacare in America. They run the nuclear program in England. They run alongside the defence program in Australia. They are very much.
Prisons in America?
Absolutely. The slogan for them is the biggest company that you never know about.
Right.
They also own Wilson's car park.
Yes, which I will never park in Wilson's car park.
Which leads into the action at the Australian biennial, wasn't it? With the Wilson Security. Yeah. And which was a very effective piece of work by a lot of those artists.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I thought it was very brave, you know, to actually stand up as a collective of people and say that we will not participate in this. We will not have Wilson security in our building because of what they're doing on somewhere else. That's great. That's integrity. And that was awesome.
Sometimes the art will have.
Are there any other questions?
Only, do you think that the lack of traction on empathy of the Australian people is related to the fact that the New Zealanders are being deported back to a first world country?
I think my personal opinion is Australian citizens, a majority of them don't know because they're more interested and worried about what's going on in their backyard than worried about what's going on for anybody else. I think it's a shame that Australian citizens aren't educating themselves more, because not only is this happening to New Zealand citizens, but this is happening to every nationality that goes into Australia. We're just the majority. And I think that Australia and New Zealand have had such tight history that surely Australia wouldn't be the country today without the recognition of ANZAC, and we are part of ANZAC. So why is this being allowed to carry on?
I've got a little bit of a different.
Have you?
Yeah, I think
That's because we're different people.
Exactly,
Oh,
different
no.
people, different opinions. Oh my God, who would have thought? It's because Australian media don't do a great job
No, we don't.
in terms of educating their population. And that's for a number of historical reasons and economic reasons. The young people, the young urban people in Australia are active and they're angry and ready for change, I believe. And I think it will be a generational shift, like is happening everywhere, really. We're seeing this, right? It's like groundswell up where over the grey baby boomers, the guys up the top, and it's just forcing through.
I also think the other thing that's going to happen is, you know, we've had 1,200 people that have been deported back to New Zealand already, but that's not 1,200 New Zealand families. A lot of people that have been deported into other countries have been actually married to Australian citizens, have Australian citizens' children. So this isn't just affecting other nationalities, it's affecting Australian citizens as well. And more people are going to be affected, and more of them are going to speak out. And the media in Australia is shocking, absolutely shocking. I mean, I can remember one title on their newspaper where it says, deporting all bads. You know, try and get that link into the All Blacks and you might sell a few more newspapers, so we're all bads now. Yeah, and actually the person that they had on the front of the newspaper with that photo was a man who had no criminal conviction, but he had a moku on his face, so he was definitely worthy of selling newspapers as far as Australia was concerned.
Australia is a special unit in that, really. I mean, also because, I mean, we can't kind of end this talk without mentioning what they have is the contemporary concentration camp on Manus and Nauru. And the more we ignore that is in existence, the worse we are. Because that is happening, and that is now. And that's Australia. You know, we go across for holidays, we've got families there, we, you know, work there, we come and live there. But literally on those islands, you know, you've got fascism, hard out in action. Yeah.
And I mean, I don't know how long it's going to take for the New Zealand government to actually stand up and have the mana that it's going to take to represent our people. But I believe that we should be having trade embargoes. I don't believe we should be endorsing any sports playing against them. If this is their sovereign right in their country to treat people like that, it's our sovereign right to stand up and say we will not live in willful blindness. We will not turn a blind eye to the oppression and the abuse that's going on in your country, and we will not participate.
How many of you are using the term concentration?
A few are. There was quite a well-known lawyer in Australia who used Mr. Dutton next to Adolf Hitler, and that went poof like this. Well, unfortunately, there's so many similarities that even I myself would say, yes, I'm sorry, but he does represent to me what history has shown how hatred can go forward.
I don't know about him and his person. I'm not saying that he's not like that. I mean, you know, I don't know. I can't say that. But from my research into the workings of Nauru, in particular, the similarities between that and in a place like Auschwitz are phenomenal. Work camps. Yeah.
Work.
Things like that would be useful propaganda to achieve something.
So
To use that term in the future all the time would be a strong way to fight.
I guess the hard thing there is that I would never want to use a word that's going to bring the people that have been through that experience to feel like they haven't. I don't want to do anything to diminish what the Jewish people have been through in their history, and you know, that was a horrific treatment how they were obliterated, and yeah, it's very hard.
yeah, that's a tricky one.
It's really
and also
hard.
in terms of, I mean, we're going off track here talking about Manus and Nauru, which is so important, you know, as well. But it is a slightly different issue in terms of that. Yeah. In terms of, I'd made this work because I wanted to look at the way New Zealand and Australian relations were operating.
Yeah, so next time you book a holiday, please book great Indonesian or Asian. I've just come from Rarotonga. It's fantastic. It's New Zealand 30 years ago, so go there. But no, I wouldn't be picking Australia for a destination for a holiday at all. In fact, the only reason I go there is to detention centres. But they don't get my money at all. And I'd also like to say that please don't think I'm an anti-Australia or I hate Australia. I actually really, really love the country. It's one of the reasons why I get shaky and get so emotional about it, is because Australia is such a great country that it helped to find who I am from the years that I've lived there. So I never would want anyone to think that Australia, but I will not sit back and not hold Australia accountable for the actions that they've done with other people.
Okay, well, I think we might call it there. Thank you so much, Philippa, for your time today.
Thank you, Cushla.
And thank you, Cushla, for coming down to discuss this. And these guys will hang around for 5 to 10 minutes afterwards, and if anyone wants to approach them with any questions, you're more than welcome. But thank you all for coming. Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for coming. I really